Story 1. Not my story, but a close friend from back in college. He said that in high school, in one of his classes, his teacher was very deaf and couldn't hear in one ear, and basically was very good at reading lips. Come their first exam of the year, with the teacher standing in front of the room, kids started to just bow their heads down and literally speak out loud, "What is the answer to 12?" etc., softly, of course. Apparently, soon enough, there was just constant conversation throughout the whole class regarding most questions. He said that soon enough, an assistant or another teacher would sit in during tests or quizzes once the teaching staff figured it out. I still find it incredibly amusing to picture a class of 40 kids talking during the test, with the teacher standing right up front. Story 2 had a kid who would raise his hand and say something like, "I need help with number 13, or whatever number. I'm a teacher's assistant." Either myself or the teacher would go over to him and tell him to speak out loud, and give him whatever help he needed that we could give. I work in a special needs school, so sometimes they don't know definitions of words or struggle getting a point across if it's a short answer. It took me a few times to realize, but about 20 to 30 seconds after this student would say that, another student would sharpen his pencil manually, and he would twist the pencil either once, A, twice, B, 3 times, C, or 4, D, so that the other student could hear it. Imagine manually sharpening a pencil, that kind of click sound. The look on both of their faces when I took the sharpener away and told them to stay after class was great. Great way to cheat, though. Story 3. Not a teacher, but a story passed on by my father. When he was attending gymnasium, Germany's equivalent of a grammar school or a publicly funded prep school, history lessons were all about memorizing dates. The classroom used for history also had one large window, which the history professor usually had his back turned to while speaking to the students. This large window behind the history teacher would fog up in the winter. On one test day, some students decided to write out entire events and their dates on the window, using their fingers. The history teacher passed out the tests. The window slowly fogged up, and behold, everybody in the class could see the dates on the window, except for the professor, whose back was turned to it. Once the tests were collected, the history professor finally turned around and saw the window. All he said was, "That's good." The professor then graded the papers as normal. He must have seen too many instances of cheating that one finally impressed him. Story 4. I'm not a teacher, but 2 former professors of mine, who coincidentally shared an office, had great stories. They were both lit English professors, so they involve essays. The first was grading a student's essay and could just sense that something was off. It didn't match the rest of the student's writing. He simply emailed the student and asked him if there was anything he wanted to tell him. No accusation, but the implication was, "I know something isn't right here." The student came in at his next office hours and confessed that another student who owed him a favor had written it for him. Because he had confessed right away, the professor gave him a second chance. Redo the assignment for half credit, and he wouldn't report the student for academic dishonesty. The student soon handed in a new essay, and the professor again sensed that something was wrong, so he did a little Googling. The student had plagiarized from Wikipedia, and not just Wikipedia, but the Wikipedia entry about Wikipedia. He reported the student. The other professor had a student turn in an essay, and again, his spidey sense was tingling. A lot of the citations and quotes were too perfect. But he did some Googling and maybe turned it in and couldn't find any evidence of plagiarism. In fact, that set him on the right track. The professor went to the library to look for the books and articles the student had listed under works cited and discovered that they didn't exist. The student had fabricated the whole thing. He did such a good job at faking the citations, he probably could have done the actual assignment in the same amount of time it took him to invent his sources. Story 5. Chemistry class in high school. We had weekly labs that required a page-long summary of the procedures and results. We had groups of 4, and I was the guy in the group that did the work while the rest mostly sat around and gossiped. Sure as shit, the day the lab summary is due for one of the more technical labs, Abby finds me before class starts for the day. Chemistry is 5 hours away, and asks to borrow my summary. I told her not to copy it word for word. She agreed, and I got it back after the first class of the day. Chemistry class rolls around, and we all turn in our papers. The next day, we were working on a new lab when the teacher pulled me aside and asked me, "Did you write this paper?" I told him the truth that yes, I did. He responds with a simple okay before pulling aside each of my lab partners in turn. I don't know what they told him, but after the last interrogation, he talked to all of us. Alright, spring-loaded giraffe gets an A, Abby gets a B, Charlie gets a C, and Nicole gets a D. You got those grades based on the number of spelling and punctuation errors in your paper. Turns out, Charlie copied off of Abby, and Nicole copied from Charlie, and the teacher guessed correctly. This same teacher would tell the class before each test, remember, cheating only helps your grade. Story 6. In 5th grade, we had an economics simulation where we were supposed to learn about having a successful business. We made little goods and had fake money, and at the end of the year, we could use the fake money to buy real goods in an auction. I was very bad at it. So I stole one of the stamps used to mark the money, got a date stamp, and proceeded to buy Xerox fake money, which I mixed into the real money. I kept small bills, didn't make enough to be suspicious, and changed the date stamp to dates that were consistent with the real bills. I had one accomplice. I told no one else. I wasn't caught. And I got a set of bath gels out of it at the end of the year. Surprisingly, I am now a full functioning adult and positive member of society. Story 7. My dad's a professor. When he gives tests to huge classes, he sets the students in seats according to their place alphabetically, and distributes multiple forms so that no one sits next to anyone who has the same test, and he can know what test each student will be administered. Once, when he was grading, he noticed an abnormally low score, below the statistical guessing rate even. His general procedure in those cases is to check to make sure that a student didn't actually skip a bubble line on the Scantron sheet, etc. Well, this student didn't do that, but the answers were awfully similar to the correct answers to a different form. They were in fact identical to the test belonging to the person on the student's right. So my dad, being a quintessential geek, calculated the chance that the student would guess randomly the exact same as the person to their right. It was somewhere less than 1 in 2 million, and included this statistic in his academic integrity violation report. Story 8. Back in high school, our sole math teacher was horrid, and was there only on a combination of tenure, and because Jesus says it's mean to fire people. Catholic school. Going to her for extra help was of no benefit to anyone. I barely understood the math, and 50% of the senior class was flunking algebra or pre-calc. I wrote an entire, admittedly simple, software suite for the calculators we all had to carry, which would show tons of common formulas as well as do them out for you, explaining each step so you could show your work, as was always required. I had a link cable for the calc, and doled the software out to jocks and dorks alike. Grades shot up, but the teacher started getting suspicious and required everyone to wipe their calc's memory and show her the big memory cleared screen before exams. So I wrote a program to fake that screen. A few people, myself included, had their GPAs saved, and now I build online training software and job aids, cheat sheets as a career. Work smarter, not harder, kids. Story 9. When I was in high school, I had a really mellow biology teacher. A little too mellow. He was notorious for leaving the classroom during tests. It got so bad that when he left, people would just shout out questions and answers to one another. Hey, what's the answer for 41? Which has more legs, a centipede or a scorpion? I think it's a centipede. You sure? Scorpions have a lot of legs, my dude. No, centi means 100, like centimeter or century. Scorpion has 6 or 8 or something, not 100. General murmur of agreement. There was this kid in our class named Assad, the son of some Pakistani general or something, who had some severe bully issues. Hey, punk walrus, you're the nerd here. Give me your paper, and he'd copy it. I got pretty tired of this, so I hatched a cheat of my own for the midterm. I asked the teacher if he wouldn't mind if I came in early and took the exam before school started. Then, when the second period came along, I'd turn in a complete zero in a fake paper. He agreed to it, but made me promise not to give out the answers to anyone, and trusted me. So I did, and I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. When class came around, that kid copied my paper, and even though the teacher actually did stay in the classroom, he kind of looked the other way with a smirk when that bully put his eyes on my paper. I mean, I laid it on thick. If a multiple choice had A, B, C, or D, I'd put an E on the Scantron portion. During filling in the blanks, he was just creative. Question: name 3 types of plants. Answer: photovoltaic, nuclear power, Ford motor. He just copied it word for word. Dumbass. So when it was time to get our grades, I got a B. Assad got a 0. Lowest grade I have ever seen, my teacher said. Are you trying to be sarcastic or something? For what does a mycologist study? You put my daughter's name. I'm calling your parents for a conference. This was a good 25% of our grade, and Assad was in deep shit. Of course, he was livid and stupid. He accused the teacher of fraud and incompetence. How could I have gotten a 0? Punk Walrus got a B, and I answered everything the same. I'm also going to speak to your parents about your rampant cheating and summer courses you can take to make it up. Story 10. When I was in high school, there was this kid I called Chris. Chris was by and large a typical student. No weird dress, no bullying, no extreme displays of intelligence. He wasn't popular, nor was he a pariah. Not athletic, nor the fattest kid in school. His grades? Average. Just some A's and a few B's. But that changed quickly when someone discovered his dirty little secret. He was expelled for his actions, but I found him several years later, working at a gas station, going to community college for computer science. A fitting degree given his story. Chris would go to the school on a Friday night, when everyone was at home and relaxing and enjoying themselves, sometimes around midnight. He parked his bike in the nearby street and made his way to the school under the cover of foliage. There was a mildly wooded field near the school, and find a small back door that led into the art and music section. He'd pick the lock on the door with picks made by hand, and sneak right into the school. He would then use a specific route that was unsecured by cameras to enter into the teacher staff offices. All one room, lots of desks, and would do all manner of tasks. He would peruse the teacher's desk. If he found the copy of the test in question, he simply took out a portable scanner and began scanning whole tests. If the tests came out of the book, he would find any relevant sections and copy them down. Tests on CDs were extremely easy, he said. He simply used PowerISO to make a bit-by-bit copy of the entire disk. But some teachers handwrote their tests. So he devised the craziest solution I have ever seen. He made a little piece of hardware that fit into the keyboards that logged every keystroke, essentially a modified, stealthier, and much smaller version of this. The result? Every week, he'd get a huge text dump of hundreds of files, and would dig through them using a fine function available on any text editor, like Notepad. He could steal entire portions of tests effortlessly. Then, it was as easy as looking up the answers and memorizing them, copying them onto tests, and getting A's. The surprising bit? He actually learned the material better than many of the other, more honest kids. How was he caught, you might ask? Well, there was a design flaw in his hardware that he used to log the material. The power necessary to run the keyboard came from the power that was supplied by the USB cord. It went in a reciprocating loop. If the hardware broke down, the circuit was cut, and the keyboard could not transmit data at all. It would not even power up. The Spanish teacher who discovered his ruse took it down to IT. He thought that the keyboard needed a deep cleaning since he ate lunch and maybe some crumbs got in there. Okay, so they pop it open and they find his little chip, micro SD card and all, frayed somehow. So the principal orders the IT guy to open every single keyboard. They deduced who it was solely by the Cinderella principle. There was no other person in the school who had all those teachers besides Chris. He was expelled and sent to juvenile hall for 6 months, plus probation. In the end, the school basically revamped everything. They had cameras running 24/7 on all doors. TLDR, Former student of my high school custom built a keylogger with an 8 GB micro SD card, broke into the school, installed them in the keyboards, and came back periodically to steal info for tests. Story 11. Not a teacher, but the best cheating story I know. So there were a bunch of kids in my high school who you wouldn't see in any class in the whole semester, but they would just turn up for the exam. Everyone knows someone like that in high school. Anyways, this one kid, let's call him Dave, shows up to an English exam. He somehow gets someone to pretty much do the whole exam for him, essay and everything, and he somehow manages to have them pass all of the answers to him. And all he has to do is staple the answers to the question sheet and hand it in. So halfway through the exam, he walks up and hands in his work. The teacher takes it, turns it around, and reads aloud, "Pass this to Dave." Silence for 3 seconds. Teacher looks right at Dave. Dave looks at teacher, and all he can say is, "F**k." Story 12. I went to a private school that used the Abeka curriculum, so all of our tests were prescribed and torn out of a book. The school would order one book of tests for each student enrolled that year. At the beginning of the year, our class managed to get a hold of one of the test books. Not the answer key, just one of the books with all the tests in it. Before every test or quiz, they would distribute the blank one to me or the other nerdy kid in class. We split the test between ourselves, and the night before the test, we would research and answer the questions ourselves, then bring it to school for the rest of the class. The administration soon realized something was up because these other kids weren't too bright, never put much effort into the rest of their studies, and weren't smart enough to mix up their answers so as to not get every single one correct. Not to mention the teacher wasn't actually teaching the class. But that's another story. They had the entire class retake the test on the spot. Fortunately, because we were the ones who did the actual studying, and because we would learn the material instead of memorizing the answers, me and the other nerdy kid were the only ones who could replace our scores. So, they figured there must be cheating going on. Now, I should point out, I was very unpopular in school, never had anyone to sit with, and was always picked on or made fun of by the same kids who were happy to use me come test time. When Judgment Day arrived the day after the retake, the teacher pointed out that only 2 of us got the same score on the test. Then he basically says, "Only 2 of you got the same score. And she has no friends and always sits by herself, so we know it isn't her." It was so humiliating, but bittersweet. I didn't get busted and never helped anyone cheat again. Story 13. Not a teacher, but similar story. In stats, a friend thought he could sneak in a burrito and eat it by holding it behind a movable closet that was situated against the wall he was sitting near. When the teacher wasn't looking, he'd bring it out and take a bite. When the teacher was looking his way, he'd discreetly hide it behind the closet, and since he was close enough, it didn't look suspicious. Teacher is at the board talking about z-scores and statistical nonsense, and out of nowhere says, "And Cam, throw away that burrito. You know there's no food in my classroom." It turns out, people have tried to use the closet in the same way in past years, so he set up an unsuspicious mirror in the back. It looked like one you'd see in any classroom, to spy on people sneaking food in. Imagine the look on our faces when we thought he could see through walls. Story 14. I'm not a teacher, but yesterday my history class was taking a test, and the girl who sits next to me, she moved to the US from France a few months ago, doesn't speak very good English, and generally seems to be the typical hot dumb blonde type, took out a juice box. Then she opened up a small flap she had cut on one of the sides of the box and revealed the screen of an iPod Nano, the tiny new kind with the touchscreen. She somehow emptied out the box, put her iPod inside, cut out a perfect area for the screen, and resealed it so it looked like new. For the entire period, I watched her scroll through notes on it and ace the test, by the looks of it, while I could barely answer a single question. But then, as she walked by my desk to turn in her test, she placed the juice box on my test. All the notes were written in perfect English, and included stuff I doubt even the smartest kid in the class knew. Today, our tests were passed back, and she high-fived me when she saw we both got 100%. French girls, man. TLDR. The harebrained French girl in my history class is secretly a juicebox genius.